Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Santosh Yadav. Santosh is an active member in the Angular community and a prolific speaker and instructor in Angular.js and Angular, the framework. In our discussion today, we talk about Angular in depth, specifically dependency injection, the difference between things like Angular Universal, Analog, and other frameworks around Angular, what meta frameworks even are, and more. Santosh has created a number of courses that we talk about as well. Underlying all of this, though, is Santosh's incredible story. He grew up in the slums of India and through open source is able to build the career he has today and even move to Germany where he lives today. So the story is really a come-up story through open source and gives you a picture into the value of open source and the way it can change people's lives. And I'm really honored to be a part of this discussion. So if you've ever been interested in learning about Angular, which is a framework for building user interfaces on the web, open source, and its capacity to change lives, then this episode is for you. Now, we have a lot of practical takeaways in this episode, and I'd like to offer all of this to you at zero cost because this podcast is separate to my day job. The way we can do that is through sponsors and partners. So let's take a moment to thank the sponsors, and then we can continue. The Contagious Code podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters offers a great way to learn about the tools we use as developers every day, tools like Git, Redis, Docker, and more, by having us build them from scratch in a programming language that we know and love, something like JavaScript or Python. So what they offer you is the ability to build your own Git using JavaScript, so you understand the underlying mechanism of the tool and also get better at your programming language. They have a generous free tier, but should you start paying, you can get up to 40% off using the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code podcast is also partnered with Stately.ai. Stately is a great way to visualize the flow of state through your application using state charts and or machines and the transitions between them. From there, you can export your state machines to a JSON document or a JavaScript file where you just fill in the transition logic to go from state A to state B and unit test everything. This creates deterministic flows of state across your application and makes your applications robust, testable, and reproducible every single time. They also have a framework for interacting with large language models for agentic workflows with guardrails. If you'd like to give that a try, go to stately.ai. Finally, the Contagious Code podcast is partnered with That Conference. That Conference is a multidisciplinary family of tech conferences that happen in Wisconsin and in Texas twice a year in the United States. And as tradition on the podcast, we give away free tickets to that. So if you'd like to attend one for free, just share the episode on social media, say you'd like to do so, and you'll enter a raffle to win a free ticket to any of the upcoming That conferences. Thank you for sticking around, and now for my discussion with Santosh Yadav. Santosh Yadav, it's so good to have you on the Contagious Code podcast. Thank you for coming on board.
Invitation. I'm really excited to have this discussion.
Yeah, I was on your podcast. We talked about React. We talked about my book, and I figure not only is it a courtesy to have you back, but it's a privilege to have you back. So I'm really excited to chat with you. Maybe we can do a little bit of an introduction. You seem to be very, very popular. A lot of people know who you are, but for those who don't, maybe we can talk about you, where you come from, your background I see a Google developer expert thing here in your background on the call. I see a GitHub star. I see a huge Lego helicopter. Let's maybe do a bit of an intro to you for the listeners, and then we can go from there.
Actually, you got frozen for a few seconds. I missed.
That's okay. I just said let's do a bit of an intro to you. I see a GDE sign. I see a GitHub star. I see a big Lego helicopter. Let's talk about you.
Yeah, sure. So, as I said, thanks again, Tejas, for the invitation. I'm really excited to have talk to you. So, a little bit about myself. I've been doing this writing code for more than 15 years now. So I started back in 2008, and I started my career as a .NET developer. So I was doing Windows development. I think that was very easy. I still think that Windows development was very easier than web. I don't know why I came into it, but yeah, that's how I started. And then after a few years, switching jobs, and then I started doing some of the ASP.NET. The old ASP.NET forms. Everyone was writing it. I think everyone thought that was cool. That was server-side rendered and everything. And we are back again to server-side rendered. And then ended up doing some of the web APIs. So I started doing MVC, ASP.NET APIs. WCF, WPF, not WPF, but yeah, WCF, and then there was something called web services, if you remember, the soap based. So
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
before REST. So yeah, I did all of those, and then I got bored. I said like, let's explore something new. So I came across Angular, then started doing Angular, and picked up like very early when Angular 4 came in. So it was back in 2017. So I started teaching Angular, did that for a few years, and then said, okay, let's go back and contribute to the community. So I started contributing to Angular around 2019. Become a GD in 2019, then GitHub start in 2020, and then uh, of course, then I came to Germany in 2022. Early, it was January 2022, and I joined Celonis like in August 2022, and that's where I have been working so far. But yeah, I just love like, learning something new, and I think Angular came at the right time.
Yeah. That's thank you for that really comprehensive intro. I didn't realize you go so far back, which is so cool. You mentioned you started with .NET, and you said it was easier than web. Why do you think that was so? I mean, I can think of a few reasons, right? Web is it lives forever. So websites from like 20 years ago still work. It needs to be backwards compatible. It needs to work in various network conditions. It needs to be good for screen read. Like there's all these things. Did you not have that in .NET? I'm curious why. What was simpler?
You just have to focus on one platform, which was Windows, right? So I don't have to worry about okay, what web, sorry, what sorry, web browser you are using. Are you using IE? Are you using Chrome? Of course, there was some time where we used to write code for all the browsers, right?
Yeah.
So in Windows development, like you have a GUI, just click on the button. Let's say if you want to have a click handler, just double click, and then you get the code where you have to write code. And nowadays you have to always remember like, oh, where should I write this code? Where should I write this code to make it more efficient? And all those things were not there. I mean, and people were like really happy if it gives them like response after like maybe 2 seconds. They never care about it. But
Yeah.
and then everything was deployed on a server, right? Anyways, so with Windows, one more thing was that you have to deploy it on the individual client machine,
Mm.
right? So you used to build and then deploy. So you are
Yeah.
building, packaging everything, and then going ahead and installing on the machine. So those were the cool stuff. I think I really found it. Yeah, that's not much to. You don't have to worry about all this environment thing and everything. So
Yeah.
it's easy in that regards, of course.
Yeah. 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 I fully agree. I think this, but it's also one of the beautiful things about the web. Yes, it was simpler, but it didn't run everywhere like the web. The web, like I was just, we published an episode recently with, well, recently is a big term, but we published it with Ujwal Sharma, the chair of TC39. And he was talking about how even like someone's toaster runs JavaScript these days, you know? So the web is, the web is everywhere. So I see that as both a blessing and a curse. You also mentioned WPF and WCF. What is that? I've never heard of that before.
Okay, so WPF was actually the new way to do Windows applications. So they created it was based on XML basically. So you write your GUI in an XML file and then it runs. So the look and feel was like little bit to like it was updated to match the Vista. Do you remember the
Okay.
Vista? Yeah,
It
so
was
I
called
think
Arrow, right? The UI.
Uh, I don't know. I mean, I don't remember. So I tried it for some time and then I gave up. I was like, okay, because it's like I started doing web that time. So and then the Windows app which we had. So team said, okay, we don't want to do any enhancements to that. So let's keep it as it is. Let's not invest more time. So my plan was to actually move this to move it to WPF at that time. It was around 2012. So then
What is WPF? Windows
Windows.
Performance.
No, it's Windows Foundation. I mean, the last word is
Okay.
Foundation. So, but yeah, so I just remember the short names still.
Okay. What? But is that like a UI library or what?
It's,
Ah, okay.
it's just to create Windows applications, Windows apps.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a framework, and then
It's
WCF
sort
was
of it's sort of like Swift UI. Is that close? Like for the
you
Apple equivalent? Okay.
can say that, and then WCF was Windows Communication Foundation. So it was like,
Mm.
of course, then the REST APIs came in, so where you can just deploy it somewhere and then you can access. But WCF gave you more control, like if you want to have what in case you want to have just TCP based communication. So let's say you have a Windows application and then you want to send some data via TCP to an machine which is lying somewhere. So that WCF was very good solution for that, very reliable in case you're having some communication. So it of course it used to support REST after some time, but main use case was actually just having communication between multiple endpoints by using, let's say, any other protocol. It used to support TCP, so and also REST. So
Wow.
we yeah.
This is so cool. Like, I just want to stop and appreciate, because like I come from a very different background. I've never done much Windows programming, much .NET, much ASP. For me, it was Mac when I was, I don't know, like 13, 14, and it's been the LAMP stack, or MAP, right? MAP, Mac, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That's where I started, and then WordPress and so on. So this whole Windows side is so fascinating for me to hear. So thank you for doing that. And then you mentioned you moved from there to Angular. You said you got started with Angular 4, I believe. This is interesting because some people on the internet, specifically Twitter, will say, "Wow, you've spent most of your career in Windows first and now Angular. You must like pain." I don't think that, but some people say that. I'm curious what you would say in response to that.
Like so there are people who are confused between AngularJS and Angular, right? Of course, ad marketing from Angular team, they accepted that, okay, that was a bad move. They shouldn't have actually named it as Angular. So, but anyways, that happened, right? So AngularJS was old framework which is deprecated now, out of support, and it's not even maintained by Angular team anymore. But then Angular 2 came, and Angular team, the vision was to actually rewrite the AngularJS framework, the entire framework. And this, they chose TypeScript. So they said, okay, we will rewrite it, but we will rewrite it using TypeScript. And that started around 2014, the project, Angular 2. And then I think it was around 2016 when they did 2.2. And and there were so many breaking changes after every release candidate, right? So it was not stable. People started using it and then realized, okay, let's move on. That was the most frustrating part for most of the companies, that they invested time and they had to move away and choose something else. And then 4.0 was, I think, really well thought of. And as I said, that was the time I was teaching AngularJS, the older version. And then I was just searching about it, and there was a news that Angular 4 came in. So I thought, let's learn it. So I started reading about it, and then I came across a course from Deborah Kurata. So Deborah, she's also one of the MVP and GD, and she's an amazing teacher. And she had some courses on Pluralsight. So I just went to Pluralsight, did that course, and then I started teaching it, the new version of Angular 4. The one thing which really clicked when I was moving to Angular was TypeScript. Because it's coming from .NET background, and most of the people you speak to, or probably you will speak to, they will tell you that transition from a typed language to TypeScript was very easy for them because they knew the pain of writing JavaScript code. I had written so much jQuery when I was doing MVC. I was really pissed off. I mean, why I have to write so much code in Java? And then you don't know, once you deploy your application, is just broken on the production because something is undefined or something is null. I was like, oh man, this is going to save my so much time, because I really loved .NET. And I was like, I saw that, okay, this is very close to what .NET is. And then that's where it clicked. And then I started teaching it, and then eventually got a job. So it's it's not like I got a job and then doing it. I started reading it, teaching it. First I learned it, then teaching it, and then I got a job.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that nice line between AngularJS and then Angular 2 and Angular 4 and TypeScript. And I agree. Once you so a lot of people say, I think Matt Pocock says, once you go TypeScript, you can't go back because you just get so used to the efficiency, right? With that, and you say you got a job with Angular, React obviously has a huge community. And I may be wrong about this, but I think most jobs today in the job market are React jobs. Mm-hmm. Do you feel some type of FOMO with that? Like, oh man, I should have started with React or something? Or Not so much. I mean, you're a GDE, so there's a Google tie with Angular, but I'm curious how you feel about React and all of the hype and community around it.
actually never felt that. So because
That's awesome.
when I started, I mean, actually there was good enough market for Angular in India. You just
Yeah,
need to like look. I think you can just pick up any technology and like be an like amazing person there,
yeah.
and you don't have to like struggle for job. That's what I think. I'm maybe wrong, but that's what I think. If you're really good at something, I think no one can say no to you.
Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. And you can be good at anything. And you don't have to be good at the thing that's in the highest demand. You could be good at something really niche like P5J. There's people who are really good at COBOL today who are making a good amount of money and have great lives and so on. So thank you for that nuanced take. Okay. You mentioned you started contributing back to Angular as well. And this is, I think, something interesting for the listeners because a lot of people here want to do that, right? They want to contribute to open source in some way or the other. I know you made a course, but I'm curious what the sort of broad spectrum of your contributions look like.
I mean, so as I said, like I was teaching Angular around
Yeah,
2017, and so the only reason I wanted to do that, I mean, because of course I was struggling financially, and there was time. I mean, I wrote about my story and journey, everything together. So, uh, and then I started doing Angular. I started teaching it, started making money, and then got a good job at a bank in Pune. So I thought, like now, let's say once I thought, like, okay, this money is enough for me and my family. I want to give it back because I can see like it has improved my life. Like of course my lifestyle as well, and like I'm able to provide to my family. So I thought like now this is the best. This is a good reason as well, right? I mean, I had good motivation, and then of course 2018 I started looking for the ways to contribute. As you said, like everyone wants to do it, but no one knows like how to do it.
yeah,
And 2018 was like really early. Not many people were doing open source in India, so I couldn't like the way I thought of contributing was actually to GitHub because when I went to the repository, and saw like top 100 contributors, and there was no one from India. I was like, that was my motivation. I said, okay, I will be there. I'll be the first Indian to
that's awesome.
be on that list, so more people can contribute. Then of course, I started figuring out ways. Nothing happened for a year. I also had some setbacks. And then 2019, I went to a conference. I spoke to a few people there. I met many amazing folks from the community, and then came back home. And after 5 days, I think, yeah, after 5 days, I just went to one of the projects, and then I raised my first PR. That was not Angular repository, but yes, at least an Angular project. So my thought, I mean, it was like pretty simple that, okay, I want to be there. I want to actually create some ways so more people can see and take motivation. And then after a month, I think it was March of 2019, I went to the Angular repository, did my first PR. And then within
Wow.
6 months, I think it was June or June. Yeah, June. It was June. I was not even bothering about it. I mean, once I started contributing, I was feeling so much like happy that I didn't even care that if I'm into top 100, but I was just teaching at some university. That was a paid gig. So, and then I suddenly opened the page, and then I said, oh, I'm already into top 100 contributors.
Wow.
So that was amazing feeling.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's a dream come true, literally. What was that contribution? Not the one that got you into the top 100, but the first one.
So my first contribution was very simple. I mean, you can say, yeah, I can say simple because of course I have done that, right? So
Yeah.
it was to add the project structure. So Angular supports two type of projects, application and library, and they have of course like a CLI to generate all those things. So there was application was covered, like what are the files which are available in the application, but the library part was missing. So I did like how your library structure looks like and all the information which is needed. So that was my first contribution to Angular.
That's so cool. And then the one that got you into the top 100, do you remember what that was? Or no? Yeah, you were just so happy with the feeling of contributing. I love that. You didn't even think, I feel I have a similar type of. Obviously, this podcast is not the world's number one podcast. It is. It's a very small metric, but it's in the top 50 in India, so that's something. But in any case, I think this is so cool because I honestly don't check analytics at all. I don't do this primarily for an audience. I do this for me and for you. But sometimes people listen, and that's great. But I love this feeling of like being surprised by like, oh wow, I'm actually in the top 100 now, and you don't even notice because you love what you do. I think that's really cool. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into Angular. I would love to. So my
Just a
background is
second. I think.
mostly sure.
Sorry, it was like frozen again because my
That's
internet
okay.
is really
Is it
fluctuating. Yeah,
is everything fine now?
it's fine now. I think so.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was saying I'd love to get deeper into Angular because I have been primarily a React engineer. I wrote a book on React. I've played a bit with Vue, with Solid, with Quick, with Astro. I will say this: my first job in Germany actually was AngularJS 1.3. And when Angular 2 came out, I was in that group of people who was just really pissed off. I was like, oh, what? I have to learn Dart now. Like it was very surprising, and I did abandon Angular in favor of React. If I was to pick up Angular today, gosh, there's so many things. I mean, there's Signals, there's Analog, the framework, there's Angular ng Universal, there's ng Standalone, which is a way of authoring components that is simpler. So I'm sort of loosely aware of all these building blocks, but I'm wondering if you could maybe, for the listeners and also for me, for those who want to get into Angular a bit more, sort of outline the key concepts and the building blocks of like modern Angular.
Yeah, I mean, if I talk about the modern Angular, it's like now it has become less complicated as used to be. I know, like teaching Angular was always something not easy, right? I mean, of course, when you have to teach Angular, I had to like go through the concepts of module. Then we have to explain, okay, there's a JavaScript module. Then why there's an Angular module. So that was all complicated things. So Angular team decided to like start really removing all this complicated building blocks out of the framework. Like they're still there because of the backward compatibility thing. But after Angular 14, there has been huge shift with the vision Angular team has, and they just want to make it more easy to learn. I mean, even one of the major pain point was RxJS, right? I mean, it's RxJS is an amazing library. I mean, it's an JavaScript library, and but it was like tightly coupled within the framework, so you have to like learn RxJS. You cannot avoid this. So it was not like nothing optional. So you have to like learn all this complicated things, even yeah, they are complicated. You don't have any other option. So with
Yeah.
Angular, the first thing they did is okay, let's remove this module concept and let's start giving a new way to author components. Because if you go to other frameworks, or as you mentioned, right, React, Solid, or maybe Quick, components is just a standalone file, right? I mean, you can just create a small component and then you can use it anywhere you want.
Yeah.
Angular wants that, but they also don't want to leave behind the people who are still using module. So remember, they can implement new feature, but they cannot just leave the people who are writing the old code and
Right.
maybe wants to migrate in future.
Yeah.
That's what happened between AngularJS and Angular 2, if you remember. That they abandoned. Okay, what if you have an AngularJS app? We don't care. Just write it again. So of course they have learned from the mistake, right? And now what they did, so they introduced like when you write a component, they introduced a new flag called standalone. So that by just using that standalone flag, your component becomes standalone, so you can just use it anywhere you like. This is still not
Is this using a CLI to generate a component? So you do dash standalone. What?
now. So
Why? Sorry. I sorry to interrupt you. I'm just you mentioned flag. So if I want to author a new React component, I don't use a flag. I just make a new file and it exists. I export a function. Is there a different process there for creating standalone Angular components?
you just create a component, and then within your component metadata, there is a property called standalone too.
What
So
is
that
what is component metadata?
okay. So Angular uses something known as decorators. So you know JavaScript decorators, right? So
Right.
to mark the class, because in Angular we still use class-based component. Okay,
I
we
see.
are school, and yeah, we love our
Okay.
component. And, we go crazy when someone tells you that okay, we should not have a class-based component. So, but we to have. So to mark that class as a component, we use at the rate component decorator. And with
Okay.
that decorator, we provide some metadata. For example, we provide okay where the like HTML file will exist for this particular component. So you can provide the path where the style will live. So you can provide your style path, and then in you can also provide the selector name. For example, let's say if you want to call this component as app table or maybe your organization hyphen table. So you can define all this in metadata information. So with Angular 14 and onwards, you have the team has introduced a new flag called standalone true. Remember, this is still not SFC, right? Single file component.
Yeah.
It's not SFC. It's just a way where you can just wrap up all this information in a single component, and then you can just use this component anywhere you want. Like just to simplify or just to remove the concept of modules. Earlier, we had concept of modules, Angular modules. You register all the components, services, directives. Yeah, okay, that was needed. So to remove this, they said, okay, now this standalone thing is there. So with Angular 15, it became stable. So now it's default. So when you create a new component in Angular, you will see a standalone flag. But the purpose of that standalone flag is just to like migrate your code, right? So they can identify. Remember, one important thing here: Angular always has your back as well. In case you, let's say, you have a Angular 13 application where this standalone functionality does not exist, you move to Angular 14, and you want to, or I think with Angular 15, you want to adopt standalone. You have to run a command. So you have to run a single CLI command, and it will
Right.
migrate the entire code to standalone. And in future, the standalone flag will be removed. So
Mm.
because of course at some point they will say, okay, you have to migrate to the latest, or we already have given you like a migration. So there is no excuse, right? That you
Yeah.
have to do it. So
Yeah.
that was all the standalone story or standalone component story.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned it's not SFC or single file components. Do you think Angular will get there at some? I just being fully honest. Like for me, this has always been the biggest roadblock to playing with adopting or using Angular in production. I feel really sad about this, Santosh, because I build with everything. I build with Solid. I build with Quick. I build with React. I build with everything except Angular because if I can be really honest, I'm scared. I'm scared of classes. I use classes where I should for like long lived state. But I've been writing React now for 10 years since 2013, and 2013 I was 20 years old, and my brain was more plastic than it is now. And so you could say, in my best years of learning, that's the model I learned. Single file components. Function is a, or rather, UI is a function of state. That's it. It's just a function. State input, UI output.
Yeah.
And so with Angular, when you have classes and decorators,
Mhm.
it in my mind, it's such a mental barrier. And of course, this is just me, but I think I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't think there were others like me out there. So I guess the question is there a discussion in the Angular world for considering something like single file components? If anything, just maybe to get more of the quote unquote market of developers with my type of disability thinking about single file components like that.
I just mentioned like whenever you mention SFC in Angular, people go crazy because Angular people just love class-based component because I mean there's a reason behind it. I mean the reason is like most of the people you see in Angular is they are coming from the type safe language, right? So they have habit of using classes interfaces everywhere, and that's one of the reasons. But it's not like Angular team is avoiding that. If you see, they have like with Angular 14 and onwards, of course, they have done so much work to make sure that you don't need to write classes like for everything. Earlier, I mean, there was need to write classes for everything. For example, if you want to create a service, you want to create a guard, you want to create interceptor, it was all classes. But now with Angular 15 and onwards, you have like functional, you have like functional interceptors. So interceptors can be just function. you have functional guards, and if there are ways like using inject function. There is a new inject function which is available. Some libraries were able to actually provide functional, what you can say, for example, NGIs, right? So functional way to write your state management. So one of the like most popular library inside Angular community is NGRX, which is actually maintained by Brandon Roberts. He's one of the contributor and maintainer for a long time. So they have actually enabled some functionality where you can actually just move, like manage your state using just functional based approach. So it's not like they don't want to do it. The question is the community ready? That's a
Right.
question. So if you go to analog, I mean, you may have heard about analog as well
Yeah.
a lot. So analog enabled it as a functional feature or experimental feature, I think, where they have SFC.
That's actually a strong argument in case of analog. Just for those listening who aren't familiar with analog, analog is like a framework, is a meta framework, right? Because Angular is a framework, so it's a framework for Angular. Similar, is it similar to Angular Universal? I believe that's also an Angular framework.
So Angular Universal is was just there to add the SSR support for Angular. So
Okay,
to give you some like background story. So when
please.
I started, so people started asking about where is SSR, right? And
Yeah.
Angular team said no, there is no plan to actually have SSR as like native support in the framework. And
By SSR, you mean just server side rendering? Just to be clear for people who haven't
yeah,
maybe heard of SSR. Yes, yes, yes.
so server-side rendering was never in the backlog or even not considered. Even I just saw a video like few years back. So where Mishko said no, we are not going to do SSR because SPA is the future. And
Right.
people were asking like, no, it's not. Some enthusiasts, like some Angular enthusiasts, so they said no, we want SSR. So they created this library called Angular Universal. So they created it as a separate library, and then Angular team said, okay, I think there is a need for it. So we will have this library as part of like Angular uh, organization, like, and then they moved this project as part of Angular organization. But today, as of today, that does not exist. So of course, Angular team realized that okay, that was a bad choice. Actually, SSR is needed. Like all the major frameworks which we have, next.
Yeah.
They're all doing SSR and pre-rendering. So now it's part of the framework. So the package is renamed, or you can say the package is now Angular/SSR. So not universal anymore.
That's so. Thank you, man. My knowledge is so outdated. I was at a conference on Friday of last week, so just like 3 days ago, and people were there from the Angular community, and they were asking me, I'm using Angular Universal. Should I use analog? And I said, you are talking to the wrong person. Let me point you to Santosh. I did my best to try and answer the question. I failed, and thank you for doing that because I know those folks listening to this will finally have their answer. So Angular Universal is now part of just Angular SSR, and you mentioned server-side rendering is a salient feature across frameworks, across Solid Start, across Quick, across Next.js, Remix, whatever. Usually SSR, file system-based routing, and like strong data fetching support are typically what make up a framework. There's obviously more, but these are like foundation. Does Angular have support for those, or is analog the answer to that? So if somebody shows up and says, hey, I'm doing an Angular project, I need to have opinions about file system based routing. I know Angular has a router built in, so maybe, I don't know. And then, so file system based routing, data fetching, and SSR. Are those built in to Angular? And if yes, what is the case for analog? Why does a framework already need a meta framework?
Yes, it's no, because of course Angular has routing, as I said, like Angular like contains a routing framework itself, but there's no file-based routing. So that's where analog really fits in. So they have file-based routing. They have, of course, in Angular also, like there is an HTTP service which is there available to actually do data fetching, and analog supports it as well, right? So it's like everything which Angular has, and on top of it, you have file-based routing and a pre-rendering support, of course, that it's already exists inside Angular as well. But uh, analog is more like trying to enable the new capabilities which is already available in other frameworks, right? SFC, file-based routing,
Right.
and all those stuff. And that's where it really fits into the community, because for a longer time, I mean, Angular community was missing this gap, because all the other frameworks had something. For example, React has Next or Remix, and they were supporting file-based routing, and they were becoming first choice, or let's say default choice for any developers who wants to like just run their blog or
Yeah.
just run their portfolio. But when it comes to Angular, people are like, "What? I cannot do this. I mean, there's no MDX support. I cannot
Yeah.
just write Markdown and render it." No, that was not there. There was a solution. I would say there was a solution for short time called Scully, but like it didn't really catch up. I'm not sure like what was the future. What is the future? I don't hear about anymore. It
Mm.
was early 2020, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it was around 2020 that Scully came in, and then yeah, it was just gone.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for, man, you are like, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. I just need to stop and acknowledge that, because like you're answering questions that me and all the listeners have had for so long. While we're on this Angular train, I think it's clear. So if I was to start a project tomorrow, coming from my background, which is single file components, JSX, no classes at all. In fact, I'm terrified of classes. I was just with the author of Remult, which is a really cool library, and he was showing me a demo, and he started using decorators, and I told him, I was like, yeah, this is the moment you lose me, and he said, no, 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 it's okay. We can also work without decorators, and it's just a stylistic taste thing, right? I know how to use them. I I've got some type of like mental block around it. Anyway, in any case, if I was to start an Angular project just to learn in the next week or so, would you suggest I start with the default Angular CLI or instead start with analog?
It depends. I mean, first you mentioned remote, so you met now.
Yeah,
So now
yeah, he's great. Yeah,
is an amazing guy. So uh, hey, now if you see this, yeah. But I mean, it really depends. Let's say if you're really interested into using some experimental feature, for example, of course, as I said, like analog does support SFC, and then there's no need to have decorators. I mean, yeah, you can just write a function based your components. It's there. But if someone who is actually looking forward to have a career in Angular, right? I would say no. Okay, so I mean, no. It's because like most enterprises are actually just using Angular,
yeah,
right? And to need to have a job, you need to learn what is used in enterprises. Of course, there will be time maybe that people will start hiring for analog. I really see the future. I mean, I have been, because of course I have contributed few PRs as well to analog, so I really like that project. But the thing is, of course, if you need to have job, go with the Angular framework and then jump into analog.
mm,
See where that solution fits into your requirement. Like if you think like reaching out to the Angular framework is not enough, I mean, then go to analog, and then you have to champion. Like you have to become the champion who will be like implementing analog in enterprise, right?
right.
But yeah, for new learner, please start with Angular. Learn the concepts like what is there,
Mm.
how you can create a new application, and then go to analog.
This is so great. And I'm so glad we made this distinction, because in the React world, it's the exact opposite. Like people used to start with React, like create React app. And now the preferred onboarding way is don't do that, but start with Next.js or start with Remix, because they handle a lot of data fetching primitives and server rendering and build steps for you. And React is no longer for the everyday web developer, but it's for the library author. And so React is just gone. Like nobody uses the general advice is don't start with React at all. Start with Next.js and you learn React. So this is I'm so glad you mentioned that, because just again with my React conditioning, I would have reached for analog earlier. Okay, thank you for that. So I have a good understanding, I feel like now, of the concepts and building blocks in Angular. You have these components that you decorate, and that's really it, right? And if you want to do routing, I assume you import some type of route component from the Angular router. If you want to do data fetching, how do you do control flow in Angular? I mean, in React we have hooks. If I had a component and I wanted it to fetch data, and it's not just a function, can we talk about how I would do that? So I would use this decorator and give it my metadata. This is my template. This is the style.
Mhm.
Where's the logic? Is it just an async function in this metadata, or is it how do I do control flow there?
Yeah. So Angular has like this something known as dependency injection from the day one. So right. So it was there in AngularJS as well. As you said
Yeah.
in AngularJS. So you used to define array and then pass all the dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
So Angular, of course, Angular also has something similar. So where you actually inject a class. So you can inject a class, and then for data fetching, they have an HTTP client library. So it's like already available in the framework. So you just need to go to like import HTTP client service and then call the method. For example, get, post, put, fetch, whatever
Right.
that you have. Generally, like the standard way which we do in enterprises is you actually hide this from your component. Like so, you wrap up all this in a service and then you just call the service methods like whatever that. But again, uh, if you remember, like as we are talking about DI, in AngularJS, we used to have like some sort of constructor based injection, right? So you
Yeah.
have a new class and then you need to pass. So with modern front end, modern Angular, we are talking about as we are talking about Angular, modern Angular. With modern Angular, you don't have to do constructor based injection anymore. So there is a new function called inject,
Okay.
which is available from, I think it was available since so much. I think since Ivy time, it was maybe Angular 10 or 11. But people realize that, okay, it can be used to actually use services outside the constructor. And now it is becoming a default way. So you can just say, okay, within inject function, you can just say, okay, give me instance of this class. And that's it. It will give you the
Mm.
class and you can just call or whatever method you want to. So yeah, we are also moving away from constructor based injection.
And it sounds like you're moving away from constructor based injection to just function parameter based injection, which is just giving arguments to a function.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. That's so great. I look forward to it. Which it sounds like a step in the direction of single file component. People will absolutely hate me for saying this, but I mean, cool. I'm really excited about that. You mentioned dependency injection. I'm surprised actually to find out that Angular at version 14 still has these concepts of service and not controller still. I mean, it used to be controller, right? Where you connect factories and services with controllers. Okay, so there's still services, but controllers have gone. Okay.
Just to clear one thing, okay,
Yeah.
I support SFC is like, okay, I'm out of this discussion. It's just Tejas who is saying this, so don't cancel me.
That's so funny. Yeah, and if you cancel him, the React side will take him. I'm joking. I'm joking. I think honestly, canceling people over frameworks is a really silly thing. But in any case, thanks for clarifying. I I hear your talk about dependency injection, and I did some research because I genuinely look. The reason we're doing this discussion is because I want to be good at Angular, and it's not just me. There's going to be people listening to this who want to be good at Angular. So in my pursuit of being good at Angular, I found that you created a hour and 45-minute course that you give away for free on dependency injection some time ago. Um, could we maybe talk about that course, Top Contour? Like, what topics does it cover? Is it still appropriate for modern Angular? What should people know about dependency injection besides what we already covered?
Yeah, actually, so dependency injection is a huge topic. Like as you mentioned, like so that video is almost like 1.5 hours. So with dependency injection, actually the way to use a service, for example, if you provide a service into
Can we define before we go down this hole? Can we define what a service is? Is it just a function? Is it a type of class? Like, what is a service in this context?
So a service is in Angular, let's say it's a class and which can have like all your business logic, or you can have your backend API call, just basically to wrap all the logic which you should not have in the component, right? So you can just have it in a class, so it's easy to test.
What logic should one have in a component,
So
and what should yeah?
that's a good question. So if I'm talking about component, your component should be like really really tough. I mean, it should just call some service, some method, and then you should just get fetch the data. If you keep it in that way, it will be really easy to test. If you just and like logic in your component, it becomes like very tightly coupled to that logic, and then it becomes really hard to reuse that component, right?
Okay,
And
so
then
let me say back to you what I heard. A component should be very it very minimal in that it doesn't, like for any data dependencies, it just talks to a black box and does one function call and gets all it needs, and then does a component return a user interface? Does it print a template, or does it just fetch data and nothing more?
Yeah. So let's say once you get some property, right? So it's, as I said, it's a class-based component in Angular. So when you want to bind something to the UI, what you do is you define a property and then you just use that property inside your template. So
Right.
you need some return type, right? So if you're making a post call and you're getting some data back, you will assign this to a property and then your property will be rendered into your component. So that's generally how it works. And as I said, like, so try to keep it minimal. So you can actually split the component in case in, let's say, in future, if you think like some part of the UI you want to reuse at some other places, you can just split it and then reuse. But if you
and so sorry, I'm sorry to keep interrupting. This is just really interesting to me. So okay, so a component has styles, it has a template, and it has a service fundamentally, and then the service is responsible for. It's almost like a controller of the component, right? It does the work. It actually controls the component. The component talks to the service, which is a complete black box, and then gets some data, and then binds that data to its template. And so therefore, a component is fundamentally a piece of UI that renders a template that gets data from a service and binds it. Is that accurate?
yes, exactly. That's how you see it.
It's
So
fantastic.
yeah, once you do that, like of course you have ways to actually like share your component child parent component communication, which happens in like almost every framework you go to, right? So in React you do property drilling, and here there are different ways to actually do that.
Dependency injection being one of them.
So dependency injection is, yeah, I mean, so if I think the closest thing to dependency injection in React is context. So
yes,
in context, it's almost very similar to what dependency injection is. So yeah, I mean, so the way to actually just wrap up your logic and put. So I have seen like it's not like you when you go to enterprises, I've seen like components with like thousands of lines of code, and then it becomes like really impossible to actually refactor that code. Probably it's like main building block. If you just start like removing something, everything fits. So it's possible. It happens over the years in case you start with wrong architecture, right? I mean, you should always think about the smallest component unit which you can create. If you just start thinking about like a single component where you have everything, it's a mess. It's a mess and it becomes very complicated, and then you end up writing like a lot of if else clauses, a lot of switch cases. And that's how your code goes, right?
Okay. So we've identified a component, we've identified what should go in a component, we've identified a service, and we've identified that it's supposed to be a black box that does all the work a component should depend on. We started this discussion in the context of dependency injection. So if we can tie it back now, what's the reason for the 1.5 hours on dependency? What are some really important takeaways that people shouldn't miss from that?
Yeah. So I mean, if you like, you need to understand the dependency injection concept first, because most of the people who are coming from typed language like .NET and Java, they use dependency injection daily, so they know about it. Like they know like what it. So like as I said, like in Angular, the services are mostly class-based services, right? Class. Now to provide this service somewhere, you have to create an instance of the class. And so
you have to do new class.
Exactly.
Like use the new keyword. Okay.
But you cannot do that everywhere, right? I mean, that's a disadvantage. What in case you just like your service changes and now you have a new service which is injected as a dependency, and you are using that service at, let's say, 100 files. So what you will do? Just go ahead and update your parameters, like update the 100 files. The answer is no. I mean, and of course, languages like .NET and Java resolved this issue very early. Like they knew that, okay, this is a problem. And they came up with the concept of dependency injection, where the framework will give you the instance of the class. Rather than you providing new, they will say, okay, this is the instance which you have available. So Angular took of course, all the motivation by .NET and Java. And they said, okay, you don't have to create a new instance. We will provide it for you. So when you inject this class, we will see, okay, this is a class-based constructor or class-based injection. So we will create a new instance for you. You don't have to worry about the class or the dependency of the class. Even though you change it, we don't break anything.
Mm.
So it stays as it is. That's the advantage, right? So that's the advantage of using DI. Now in Angular, but again, now let's go a little bit deep. So you provided a service, right? So what we have in service, you have ways to query your data, for example, get post,
Sure.
or you have a logic, some logic. So now in dependency injection, there is a concept that at what level you want to use this service. Like, do you want this service to be available as a singleton instance across your application? Because this is very important, right? In enterprises, you may have a lot of data sharing, or you can say state management, simple words,
Yeah.
right? So you may have a lot of state management, and you may want to actually control this. That's why this course is like 1.5 hours. So it explains like how you can have a service which is which gives you a singleton instance at your application level. But what in case I want to have an instance at component level, right? So a
Mm.
in its own state. So how you can do that? So there are ways to do it. And then, of course, now if you have at component level, at till what level it should give you control or give you same instance. So there are so many other feature flags or other flags which you can say are available with dependency injection, and it covers everything. And there is also
Wow.
a way to provide non-class based services. So for example, a function or let's say a value which you want to provide it as a service, you can do that as well. Now, going back, my course of course does not it was old, so because I did it during Angular 13, and now there are changes in Angular 14 and above. So it does not cover everything. I mean, which is in modern Angular, but yeah, if you see that, I mean that will give you a brief idea about what dependency injection is.
That is so cool. Thank you. So back when I was doing AngularJS 1.3, we would instantiate classes, so services or factories, and we never could decide when to use what. But when we instantiate one thing in any case, and to use dependency injection back then, we would basically give it to Angular. So Angular would give us some type of registration function, and we say, here, Angular, take this instance and give it to everyone who wants it as a dependency. Is that in the simplest possible terms? Is that how Angular, in a modern way, also handles dependency injection? Meaning, you give an instantiated instance of a class to Angular, and Angular distributes it across the application.
Yeah, basically
Oh,
yes.
cool.
So the one thing is, I mean, that there was a problem with AngularJS, if you remember, as you mentioned, right? So when you used to provide one service or like a factory, it used to give the same instance to everyone.
Yes.
So Angular gave you more control. That okay,
Wow.
by default we will give you a single instance, but you can control the service instant at let's say component level.
Right.
So you have more control, like whether you want a single instance, whether you want a new instance. So those are the things which are changed.
This is so cool. This is a trend that is very common across the web now. Is getting more granular in favor of giving developers more control. And it's so I'm so not surprised but impressed to hear that Angular is also prioritizing that, because in React, this is the whole point of server components. Server components previously, if you were to fetch data correctly in React, which this is a hot topic in React, right? People don't know, the vast majority of people don't know when is the right time to fetch data in React. And so a lot of people are fetching data inside a hook called useEffect. And when the promise resolves, they're then calling set state from another hook, use state, to set it into state. The problem with this entirely client-side data fetching is you have to wait for the browser to first download React, then to render the component, then to start fetching. So if you've got 100 components on a page, that's 100 network requests that happen in serial after React and React DOM download. And so it's the worst possible network conditions to fetch data. And so the correct way to fetch data in React is to do it in module scope. So before you even have a function component, like somewhere just like in raw Java, it looks like global scope, but everything's modules, so it's in module scope. That's the right time to fetch, and this is why people need a framework, right? But if you do it in module scope, that is the entry point, being a page in your application, you can only fetch at that level, at the page. So if there's a small form, like a contact form, that needs to fetch data, You can't do that. You can't do it at the component level. You can only do it at the page level. And so if you want to fetch data in a self-contained component in React, you have to do it only on the client side with use effect. And so server components is the answer to that. You can now, using server components, any component, even a single button somewhere deep in your tree, can be an async function, and it can be responsible for its own data. It can fetch its own data. So granularity is the trend, and I'm so happy to see that that's happening in Angular, also in CSS. Right, we see granularity here with container queries. So before, the viewport used to be the source of responsive truth, and now just some div, some parent can. So I love that. I'm so happy to hear that even Angular, no, not even Angular, that sounds really disparaging, but that Angular is also on this trend. Thank you for sharing that. You've done a lot of work with NX, and I see that NX is really close with the Angular folks, but they're trying not to be. They're trying to be like more broad focused in the industry. But you've done some really cool stuff with NX that I've followed. For example, you've built, I believe you built a cross-platform app using Ionic and Capacitor and NX. You've got lots of I think you've got like 3 hours plus of content about creating libraries in Angular with NX. I believe your team migrated from Angular CLI, to NX some time ago, and you published some content there. I'm curious, for those wondering about NX, when to use it, what trade-offs are involved, if you could maybe speak a little bit to that.
So, the reason you see this close connection between NX and Angular was actually NX, when the initial version was launched, it was only to support Angular. Okay, so Angular, of course, from 2015, no, not 2015, sorry, 2018. So Angular monorepos since 2018. So what I mean by monorepos is you can have multiple applications, multiple libraries, and Angular actually got one thing really good, was to support libraries. This is one thing which I've seen like people struggling in other ecosystem, but Angular is like, no, we don't care, because they gave you a way to create a library and then publish it, use it, whatever you want to do, right? So that was there. So, but with monorepo, there's one issue which we have seen a lot. For example, if you're a Java developer or .NET developer, as your number of application grows, your build time grows.
Oh yeah, totally.
And that's why the NX folks, they came up with this idea that, okay, why don't we just fill this gap? So what we can do is, any enterprises who are doing this monorepo stuff, we will provide them way to actually improve their build times. Okay. So what NX does is actually it caches your build, it caches your test, and it just runs quickly, right? So once you run, let's say you have 10 different applications and you want to, like, you already ran the build for 10 different applications, you run it again, it will be just retrieved from the cache. And they do it really well. I mean, the caching part and the caching validation, these are like the toughest thing to do in technology, and they do it really well.
So it's memoization on each application in a monorepo with a little bit more considerations. Is that like a okay?
That's how it started. So that's how it started. So that was long back, right? So it was just a wrapper on top of Angular, and it was doing that. And then they saw the vision to this product. So they said, why not to take a step ahead? Why not to make it as a build tool rather than just something which exists for Angular and monorepo? Why not to rebuild the entire thing and make it as a build tool for everyone? So as of now, as of today, you can actually bring any technology, React, talk about Remix. You can bring anything inside this monorepo. So this is like a plugin based a build tool. So you can plug in any tool which you like inside NX, and that it works. So what you get is you get the advantage of using your tool plus the caching which is being provided by NX. So your build time improves. Plus, it also gives you the ability to adopt modern tooling. For example, there was a time people were moving to Cypress. Then people said, okay, let's move to Playwright, right? But introducing a new tool is a lot of work. Believe me, you might have done that as well, right? A lot of configuration, a lot of things. So they said, why don't we do that? Like, if you go to NX repository or NX workspace, you can just add Cypress like this. Just click a button or just run a command, CLI command, and then Cypress is available for you. All configured. You just need to run it.
Wow.
Best thing is the migration. So let's say this is something which they, of course, take motivation from Angular, because if I mentioned this, right? Angular does not introduce a breaking change. So in case I want to move to Angular 14 to 15, I have to run a CLI command and it takes care of migrations. NX also follows the same. So there are few bunch of technologies. For them, they have first class support. What I mean by first class support is they are part of the NX bundle which you get. One of them is React, Next, Nuxt. I think they also support Remix. So let's say if you want to move from React, whatever version to the next version, what you do is just run a CLI command, and that's it. You get migrated to the next level, next version of React. Even they have migration from Webpack to Vite. So you just run a CLI command and then you migrate your all the configuration to Vite. They were like successful in migrating up to 90%. That's what I heard from Yuri last time. But maybe it depends. Like if your project is not that complicated, it's 100%. So you don't have to do even anything. And this is something which you can also build. For example, let's say you decide to write your own framework tomorrow, right? And you said, okay, I have my framework, but I want to provide the support for migration and everything. You can just create an X plugin and you can like use their own APIs, the NX APIs, write your migration and just ship it. So anyone using NX and your framework can just migrate like with a single command. And that's something which they really got very well. That's why they have like huge adoption from the community. And now their focus is just becoming framework independent or technology independent. They are just a build tool. Just use it wherever you want it. You want to. They make sure that they give the first party support to all the frameworks which are like popular, right? Because they have consulting company, so they of course do consulting. So they work with a lot of big enterprises, and they do changes based on the requirement which they get, right? So they learn from some companies and they come back and then they improve the product. So it's like for you, for as a developer, you are actually getting a tool for free, which is like trusted by some enterprises because it runs on the production, and you're also getting all the features which is requested by them, plus the hot fixes.
Wow.
So, and it's all for free. So that's the core product. But there is, of course, everyone needs money, right?
Yeah.
And so after some time, they realized that why not do the same thing on CI? Why not we just enable the faster build, faster test, even identifying this flaky test, right, which is a huge market for
Yeah.
today. So they said, why not we do this on the CI? And they have their own workflows. So it's called NX workflows, which is still like they are working on it. It's not available for everyone, but you can like as a company you can just ask them and they will provide you access, and then you can do some POC and stuff. So they have something known as NX agents and NX workflows. So NX workflows are even available for open source projects. So if you're running an open source project, you can just use it for free, and you get like faster builds, caching, distributed caching. I mean, I haven't talked about distributed caching, which is really cool, but I'll come to that. But identifying flaky test, like faster Cypress test, faster playwright test, all this on your local machine as well as on CL. And yeah, as I said, like it's free for open source, free for personal use. Just go ahead and try this out.
That's incredible. That it sounds like a real powerhouse that came from the Angular ecosystem. Wow, I'm really really impressed, especially with that migration story. You mentioned it will help you migrate from say React 16 to React 18, whatever it may be. I think that's great. Is it possible? Does that, and I would consider those sort of in library migrations. Does it support trans library migrations? What I mean by that is if you've got a bunch of Cypress tests and you're using Cypress, would NX help me move not just to Playwright with configuration, but also move all my tests over to Playwright? Or is that not yet possible?
That's not possible. Probably if someone knows, like they can write the migration and they can just do it as an NX plugin.
Yeah, that's the power of the plugin system. I think that's very possible and very cool. This may be a free open source project idea for someone listening because the tests in Cypress and Playwright look very very similar. I think it should be runnable with a code mod. What if somebody's not using NX and they just want to run this one-time migration from like React 16 to React 18? Would they need to add NX to their project and then run the plugin, or is there a way to like single command one time run a migration via NX without like setting up your whole project to depend on it?
You don't need to install the entire NX thing. I think NX you can just do npx NX in it, which just like installs the minimum thing, and then you can do that. Or you can
Okay.
try Lerna. Lerna is also now NX. So, but I don't think so. They provide the migration part. They don't.
Okay.
Do. So Lerna is just like all the other things which NX does, like for caching and yeah. But
That's
like
so
not
cool.
migration.
Now you mentioned distributed caching. You said you'll come to that. Is that basically generating assets and then storing them on a distributed CDN, or is there more to it?
Exactly. So let's say as of today, you build all the projects again and again, right? Even your
Yeah.
worker. So let's say if you're just as you say, like this is a story for monorepos. So you have 100 projects and
Yeah.
not touching 100 projects every time. You're just
Yeah.
probably touching maybe 10, 20 projects, let's say, in case you have a library. And I will also talk about code splitting, which is very important for React. I'll come back to that. But let's say if you're just touching 20 projects, what you do, you still build 100 projects, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not available on your machine. But someone already did that. So NX, what it does is it will take that cache. It's actually optional whether you want to push a cache from your machine or not. But it is recommended that when you do a build on main, you should push that into cache.
Right.
So everyone who is like working on the project gets the latest cache which is available on main, and they don't have to build it again. So that's the concept of caching. I mean, you can have your like custom caching as well. For example, we are actually trying NX Cloud now at Celonis. We are working on the migration, so we can use NX Cloud. But before that, we had S3 bucket. So we used to push like all the cache on the S3 bucket and just retrieve it to build the project. So, but we were not doing distributed caching. We tried it for some time, but with all the latency, right? I mean, it's the
Yeah.
S3 bucket at the end, so it was taking a lot of time and it was decreasing the productivity, to be frank. So
Right.
we moved away from it, but it's a very good use case in case you have like thousands of developer and then you have hundreds of projects or thousands of projects and you
Yeah.
just like build like quickly with
Yeah.
just a single command.
Wow. This is actually, I feel, the real place where Angular shines, because I hang out with like developers who frankly are not working in the enterprise space for the most part. They're working at like quote unquote sexy new startups like Clerk or Unkey or whatever, right? And these are, not to speak ill of them, but they're small. They're small and new. Their team's like 6 people, and they've got some VC funding, and they want to build and go. They're not like DataStax, for example, huge company, right? 500 employees and very big, 16-year tenure. And Spotify. When I was at Spotify, guess what? Almost all of Spotify is Java. And they do use React at Spotify for some projects, but that React looks exactly like Java, .NET, C Sharp, etc. Like it's very class based and so on. They will not use function components, and so Angular, I feel like, does a really great job of enterprise specifically and scale, as does NX. And I think, honestly, if I ever have a big enterprise customer, I would probably think about Angular first, and not analog, but just Angular, and then we adopt analog incrementally. Let's maybe pivot from this and talk more broadly about open source and community. I mean, just looking at your background here, my goodness, you're an open source superstar. You built a thing. I remember it's angular-builders.dev, right? It's a community site for Angular builders, and you've been working on the UI. I'm curious if you could speak to that and maybe give some advice for people who want to get involved in open source and make a career out of it, really, like you have.
Sure. I mean, that was my early project because Angular 8, when Angular 8 came in, so they opened a plugin for deployments. So, for example, I can run a command called deploy, and my application gets deployed to some of the vendors, right? So there was the initial POC which Angular team did was supposed to for Firebase because why not? Like it's our homegrown
Yeah.
product. So they gave us support for Firebase, and then they said like as a community you can actually just go and build your own. So I did that for Netlify. So I was like, I was using, I had just started using Netlify, and I was like big fan because it was giving everything for free to me. So I was like, okay, let's build something for Netlify, and I ended up doing that. So I remember like when we built it, and then one of my friend who Johannes, who is in Germany as well, but yeah,
Is this Schickling, Johannes Schickling from Prisma, or
uh,
a different Johannes? Okay.
So it's a different. Yeah, he's also a GD for Angular, and he built it for GitHub pages. So we both published it like around the same time, and then Minko picked it up. So Minko actually was doing some interview about Angular at that time, and then he mentioned there is a guy called Santosh and Johannes who built this plugin. I was like, what the hell, man? I'm someone from Angular team. I don't. They know that there is a guy called Santosh, so it gave me like good satisfaction, and people started recognizing that okay, this guy exists because of that plugin. Because I was doing open source, I was contributing to Angular, I was contributing to NGRX. Even believe me, I have a PR for React. I
Wow.
contributed to React in 2019.
Awesome.
So it was for Create React app, CRA. So I was doing a lot of,
Yeah.
I got because of it in this, but that's a different story. So people started recognizing me, and then I thought like, why not to combine all this different different tools which community built, and then I ended up doing this Angular builders.dev. I think it still runs. I haven't checked it like for a long time because
Yeah.
I think it's on the even older version of Angular, and I don't see like a lot of people doing Angular utility now because most of them have moved to NX. So
Mm.
they try to provide NX utility first because it's like widely adopted in the enterprises, and that's the thing, right? So
Yeah.
hmm,
Yeah. You said similar on this topic of being involved in open source. By the way, thank you for sharing that. You really, I consider you one of the heroes of open source. I mean, having given back so much to even projects like React from your background, I think is so cool. You said this, and this stuck with me as I was stalking you. I tried to find a more politically correct way of saying that, but whatever. You said if all people using open source projects start investing their time in making it better instead of criticizing it, it will make those open source projects better for another thousands of developers. I think that's so cool, especially because today we live in an age where there's a lot of criticism and not a lot of coaching, unfortunately. I'm curious if you could speak to that. Maybe the background of that particular post, but also what are some ways we can actually do that? Because I feel like a lot of the times people complain is because of either a sense of entitlement or a sense of ignorance, meaning I don't really know how to make it better. So I don't feel, put it this way, I don't feel empowered to actually go fix it because I don't know that I can, right? So what are some ways that we can maybe move that criticism towards coaching by educating people? No, you can actually go fix this. Kind of like you said, you opened a pull request in React and Create React app. How can we empower people to make those open source projects better for the other thousands of developers?
the most important thing is like as an experienced developer, right? So you have to take this lead first. I mean, I have seen like of course those criticism coming from people who have like hundreds and thousands of followers, right? I mean, they're putting a bad image for a project just because of single issue, and then there are like students who follow you, like most of the students, and then they see this, okay, this guy is talking bad about this project because so probably this project is not good. But
Yeah.
remember, like if you have what you can say, if you have a power, right, you have a responsibility as well. And I think
Spider-Man.
exactly. I think that's something which you have to remember as someone who is lead into the community. Like, of course, you can be influencer and you can be a lead as well. I mean, totally depends. I mean, I generally like try to keep it in two different categories because, for example, like folks like you, I try to put them into a leader category. Like they are actually building something, they are teaching something, but there are influencers who are not doing anything apart from just doing some criticism and just sharing the random stuff on the internet. Right? I just try to stay away from those people. But if you really care about like the community, you should the first communication which should start for any project is on GitHub, not on Twitter. Right? So if you think like there's something bad,
That's beautiful.
go ahead and open a discussion, right? All like it's the projects don't want to like push you away from contributing back. They want people to come back and like help improve the framework or help improve the library. But if you're doing it on at some other place, they even don't know about it. And
Yeah.
one thing which I've noticed, right? So most open source developers, they are not active on Twitter. So what you're doing, what you're just what there was a meme, right, where there's a guy who is just shouting in the cloud.
Yeah.
That's what you're exactly doing. I mean, the guy who is actually building that stuff is not even on Twitter, and you are
Yeah.
writing him or probably bad about his project on Twitter. How
Yeah.
does that make sense? If you really
Yeah.
have something to share, just go on GitHub, open an issue, have an honest discussion that, okay, what things can be improved, what can be done if this is a missing feature. I think the person who has created it maybe can give you more context. Like if this is a missing feature, why it is missing feature, right? Why they don't want to build it? Because
Yeah.
there are a lot of open source. They don't want to actually have new features because maintenance. They don't have money. They don't have money to actually even support that project in that stage. And then you're
Yeah.
talking about introducing something new and then just going away because you just had a single use case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So be respectful. I think if you have anything,
Yeah.
just start with the GitHub.
Yeah. This is so good. I think oftentimes it's just a lack of empathy. We don't realize you said so many profound things. One, you said have the discussion on GitHub instead of Twitter. Like it starts on GitHub and then maybe it finishes on GitHub. It doesn't need to go to Twitter. Also because Twitter is public. It's, as Elon Musk likes to say, it's the public town square of the world. Why would you go there and be like, hey, I'm missing this feature or Next.js is too slow? It doesn't. So I love that. Have the discussion on GitHub and not Twitter. I would get that like framed in my office and tattooed across my back because it's so valuable. I will confess, earlier in my career, I was this kind of person who would, say these things on Twitter publicly. If a framework or a library was missing a feature, I learned my lesson. I don't do that anymore. I don't go to GitHub. And we can talk about why. I should, for sure. I agree with you. But instead, what I do is I have the privilege of being pretty well connected to authors and experts such as yourself. And so, if there's a feature in Angular that is not meeting my need, before going to GitHub, unfortunately, and this is wrong, I'm admitting, I will go and DM Minko and be like, Minko, I don't get it. And this is bad because look, he has money, right? Because he works at Google on Angular. He's not in the like homeless open source maintainer boat. So I feel like I could, but also his time is not that is so valuable that I have no right to just sort of interrupt it. And the real respectful thing is to go on GitHub and do it. The reason I don't, and this may be the reason these like problematic people also don't, is because I have trauma associated with GitHub. When I was younger, I did open issues, and the response was not friendly. It was the opposite. And I can understand, obviously. I mean, these people are, as you mentioned, they don't have money. They're probably very pressed. They're struggling with burnout, trying to entertain the whole world's requests. I can understand that now as a 31-year-old engineer who's been writing code for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. But back then I couldn't, and so I felt like the only thing I could do, if not DM people, is like just hope that somebody hears it if I shout into the clouds. Yeah. So I guess the take. Sorry if I'm talking too much. I'm just really digesting what you're saying. The takeaway is really empathy and understanding. Right? You would open a discussion or an issue in GitHub, express, hey, this is meeting my need, but I also acknowledge that you're super busy and maybe I can open a pull request and support you. Yeah, that's probably the best way. Is that in the area of what you'd consider like truly excellent collaboration?
So a lot of open source projects have started doing this. So in the PR template or in the issue template, right? So they give you an option if you want to contribute and select yes or no. I mean, they are ready to like help you to get this feature accepted in case you are happy to raise a PR. Otherwise, like it goes into backlog.
Yeah.
Simple, right? I mean, if it's not important for you, then it's important for no one.
Yeah. 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 That's excellent. You as part of your open source journey and really success story, you shared your story on the GitHub README project last year. That must have been an absolute dream come true. How did that feel? How did that work? Did GitHub reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? And finally, what was the impact of that?
So when I became a GitHub star, right, back in 2020, so I was the first Indian to actually become a GitHub star.
Wow, I didn't wait. I didn't know that. That's amazing. Congratulate. Woo. I mean, out of 1 billion people in this world, you were that's a huge honor. I can't believe, like, I'm even more honored now to have you on my podcast. That is so cool. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to celebrate that a little bit. That's so cool.
Thank you for that. But actually, yeah, I mean, it's okay. I mean, somehow, I mean, it happened, and I'm really like I was really proud to see that. Like I was the first, somewhere I'm like the first Indian in the world. But that happened in 2020, and then actually after I became a GitHub star, and so I started getting approached for projects. So that was the time I started like making more money. We moved away from the slums, so I was living in a slum like till 2020. So of course it gave me so much, right? So and then I ended up like writing this tweet that okay, we finally moved into an apartment in 2020. It was like October of 2020, and then uh, Dan Wallin from Microsoft, he picked up that tweet and he said, "Hey, why don't you write your story?" And then I ended up writing that story for the first time. Like I said, shared it with everyone on Free Code Camp, and of course, people connected to that story because like in India, out of 10 people, out of like 10, probably 6 or 7 people have this kind of story where they have to
Yeah.
struggle and make it. Not everyone feel comfortable writing about it, other until unless they are like superstars or they are sportsmen. So because they make more money by selling their story, right? But common people, no one talks about them. So I ended up writing the story. People got really inspired, and then of course that was the year I started doing consulting, of course, and that was the time like where I don't have to like go and ask for work, right? So it was like okay, people were coming to me and saying, "Hey, do you want to work with us?" So the entire thing got changed, and then GitHub README started around 2020. I think that the same year, I think README project started around 2020 or 2021. So I wanted to actually share this with GitHub, and then I was already GitHub star, but I didn't knew like whom to approach. Of course, I was on Slack. I'm still on the Slack. And then last year, I said, "Hey, I mean, I want to share my story, and whom should I approach to?" And then, of course, like the people on the Slack replied, "Yeah, yeah, we can do this," and they also liked the story, and so it was like really nice feeling that like of course there are people on Free Code Camp, there are people on the internet, but there are more developers on GitHub, right? And they
Yeah.
they they read all this stuff. And when I wrote this, I mean, shared this with GitHub README, a lot of people, more developers, they started connecting. Like, hey, yeah, I mean, we have been through this, and this story really connects to us. Even like my coworkers, they were like really inspired by reading that story, and they were like, yeah, they were like, they thought they said like, we feel really proud to work with you. So of course, recognition a little bit, and I think yeah, that's and one more important, most important thing, there are people who reached out to me and said, "Hey, Santosh, like I was going through tough time. I read your story, and it gave me courage to actually like hold back and like to tell myself that I can do it. I mean, I can like make my future better. So thanks for writing that story." So yeah, it
Wow.
gives me like, a lot of I mean, lot motivation again to actually never give up because
Yeah.
there are people who are still fighting their fight. And I think if I have shown them that I can do it, then I should not give up. I mean, of course, it was not like after 2020 everything became stable, right? Or everything
Yeah.
was happy. It never happens, right? I mean, you cannot.
Yeah.
So there were some setbacks last year as well, but I decided like okay, I want to like, believe me. I mean, 2022 I came to Germany, and then again that was a very very rough time for me as well. And I ended up reading my story. I cried, and then I said no, I will like this time will go away as well as it did few years back.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to give up.
That's so beautiful. So at this point in the call, in the episode, we don't have hyperlinks in video or audio, right? So you mentioned the story, you mentioned living in the slums. There's no link that somebody can click in audio format to go read that. Can we talk a little bit more about that for people who now want to know more and don't have the privilege of just like finding the link to click and read? We'll obviously include a link to your published story in the show notes, but what was that like living in the slums, and what was it like to come out of it? I mean, internet access, does that exist in this? I'm obviously, I grew up not living in slums. Did you live in the slums your entire life? Were you born in the slums? Like let's dig into that if you're comfortable.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, so of course I was born in a slum in 1986. So and then Look,
Wait. So sorry, you were born in the slum in 1986. Does that mean your parents were homeless, living in slums? And was it just generations and generations of homelessness and slum living, or?
actually, so my father's he's he. I mean, I was in a good school as well, so it was not like a public school because my father used to work in this factory, this
Mhm.
cloth factory, because that was very much what was running the entire what do you say, entire Mumbai city at that time. So people used to work
Right.
for cloth factories. So he used to work there. He used to make like enough money at that time to like run the family and then make sure that we have a good education. So I was in Hindi medium school, which was like one of the good one in the city where I used to live. So I'm born in a city called Mulund. I mean
Hmm.
city, Mumbai, and then there is an area called Mulund. And then, of course, my education happened. And then I think the first time I realized that, okay, people don't see me as like what I am is when I went to college, right?
Yeah.
Before that, I had no idea, okay, why there should be a difference between me living in a slum or someone is living in the high rise society or
Yeah.
something. And then I met a friend who used to live in this Mulund as well, but he used to live in like apartment and then his family used to actually treat me not like, yeah, I mean, they just they don't want you to treat me in good way, I would say. So
Right.
then I started realizing, okay, there is some difference like where we live. And I said like, okay, but the education is the only thing which can like take me out of this. My father lost his job in around 2002, 2003. So he, of course, that was the time I moved into college. So he lost his job, and then we were like really struggling with the finances. And my father said like, yeah, I think you should like leave your study after this. I mean, after completing your diploma. So I was doing diploma in computers, and he said like look for a job. And that was the time I wanted to like just I wanted to complete my bachelor's.
Yeah.
So I remember like crying entire night. I was like, no, I want to study, and I couldn't sleep entire night. I mean, I was just crying. So my mom, she actually convinced my dad to support the study. She said like, do whatever you want. I mean, but my son will study further.
Mm.
So somehow like he took money from his brothers and he had some savings in this terms of bonds, like this.
Yeah.
So he had some bonds as well. So he actually made sure that I study further. So I completed my bachelor's, but that was a bad time as well for the entire economy. 2008.
Mm. Yeah.
2008 was like worst year. People just complain about today, but they might have never seen 2008. So that's why
Yeah.
uh, there were no jobs, literally no jobs. And
Yeah.
so I started working at a startup. It was not even a startup. I will not even call it startup. So it was like 2 BHK home,
Hmm.
uh, where some society, and then
BHK meaning bathroom.
kitchen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and then he just used to run his office, like whoever the person was. So he was running their office. Like my salary was 5,000 rupees. So I mean, I used to feel like, my God, probably this the helper at this office might be making more than me.
Mm.
So that was, but I don't want to sit at home. So I was like, okay, I want to like at least start working somewhere, and then got that job. It didn't work out. I mean, that was very toxic. I mean, I don't know why, but I have this thing in my that from the start that if someone is forcing me to do something, and I know that this is wrong, I will never do it.
Yeah.
Whoever it is, I mean, he can be the CEO of the company. I don't care.
Yeah.
So I left a job like in 9 months, and then I was at home for a few months. But I actually picked up part time, probably that was like 4 months job. It was
Hmm.
a little bit related to technology. They needed someone from technology to do that. That's why I was there. So we used to run some, just in case needed. We used to run some Oracle queries. That's it, right? Otherwise, that it was more like, okay, click a button and then just sit and relax. So I ended up doing that for a few months, and then uh, like switched few jobs. And then finally, I think it was around 2011, I reached at startup where I started working. And it was like, of course, at that time, I thought like my whatever salary I'm making is good. I was probably making close to 30,000-40,000 per month. I was like, okay,
Okay.
this is good time. Probably I can move from the slum. I was expecting my first kid. So I was like, okay, I don't want like her to be born here. And that was
Yeah.
fun. And yeah, that plan fired back actually. So my daughter was born premature, and then we had to like I was under a lot of debit. My entire month, like my entire year salary was like 4.5 lakhs in rupees,
Mm-hmm.
and then my bill was 8 lakh. So
Oh man.
I was like, okay, what should I do? So I ended up taking a lot of loans, a lot of money from my friends. Of course, I had no idea about like all these platforms where you can like take donations and all this stuff. So I ended up
Yeah.
paying everything from my own. So I paid like probably 8 lakh rupees at that.
Wow.
And then I decided like, of course, like now my daughter is here. Now what should I do? So of course I have to work hard. I
Yeah.
started working hard. I mean, I started like, I remember like working for 4 or 5 days in the office and going home after 4 days. So I was like working like crazy because I knew like, of course, if I have to survive, I have to make money. And how can I
Yeah.
make money? Is by getting promoted or being probably be more uh, involved in everything which is going on. So
Yeah.
I ended up doing that. And then suddenly like there were changes in the management. The new manager was like pretty toxic. I recently wrote a tweet and on LinkedIn as well as post about the story. So and it ended up being really toxic. So I said, okay, now it's time to quit. And also realized that my daughter is 4 years old and I haven't spent much time with her. So
Wow.
that was like when you have this realization, right? So I felt really bad. And then
Yeah.
uh, somehow I moved. I actually this is something which probably I believe that God had this plan that this guy is actually fighting for whatever he wants to give provide for his family. So let's help him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I ended up moving to Pune. I had no plan.
Okay.
So this happened in a day. So after I left my startup job, I joined a company which I knew that is going to be closed.
Mm.
So I got idea like within few days that okay, there is something which is wrong here and I should run away. So on a Saturday,
Wow.
I'm giving an interview for a company in Pune. They took my interview. Within 2 hours, they sent me offer letter said come to Pune next on Monday. So it's Saturday. They said okay, tomorrow is fine. Just come to Pune on Monday. I was like okay, give me a few days, and then I just ran away from that company. Right. So I reached
Wow.
Pune in 2016, and then I started building up again from zero, of course, because I had it was around 2015. I had moved out of from my parents' house where I used to live.
Yeah.
Even that was becoming much toxic. So my family was not supporting really well to my family, and I realized that. So I said, okay, let's quit. And then we actually moved to a friend's house for almost a year. That's where we started from zero. So
Mm.
we slept on the floor for a few days because we had no mattress, and we even couldn't afford it because I had no savings at all. Because it was like that was the time I was making money and paying more than what I earned. So I used to still wonder like how I did that because I have no idea.
Yeah.
Probably credit cards. That's how I survived because I had
Mm.
it at that time. But then so, yeah, I moved to Pune and then I started like getting more time for myself. Like in Mumbai, you travel for 4 to 5 hours, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. Pune was like I'm home within an hour, like 30 minutes to office and then 30 minutes back home. I was like, what is this? What I mean, I'm suddenly getting too much time. So I started I started like keep like upgrading myself. So
Mm.
writing, I think I wrote few blogs on .NET at that time because I was .NET developer. And then I started teaching Angular. I started making money. I remember like buying our first bed and first mattress with that money which I made like by teaching. So
Wow.
and then that was the whole motivation, right? So I started from nothing. I started from zero, and then have a bed to sleep at least, right? It was not like I was making too much money. I was
Yeah.
happy. Now I'm able to provide to my family. Like we are not struggling anymore. We have a bed to sleep on. I have a good mattress to sleep on, and that's what matters. Like at the end.
Yeah.
So and then of course time. Then I started teaching. I remember like 2018, I took my family for vacation. and I was really happy uh, because, of course, there was a time I went on vacation, but that was like 2014.
Yeah.
But after 4 years, I was finally able to take them on a vacation. And
Where did you go?
so I went near Pune. It's called Mathiran,
Okay.
Mahabaleshwar. It's famous,
Yeah.
what you can say, the hill station in.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to Mahabaleshwar for a few days, and I really enjoyed it. And I think then, of course, this I started contributing, and then I became GD, became GitHub star, then started making more money. Then we moved to the apartment, as I mentioned earlier. So, and then we came to Germany, and like that was, of course, that was a gap of 1 year, but like 2020 is like one of the best year or best thing which happened, because 2019 I was working at a bank, and then they got really, I mean, it was not as expected at the end, because all these banks, somehow they are like really toxic. Once you start contributing to open source and you start
Yeah.
like going into public speaking and everything, they were not supportive of it. I was about to speak at a conference, and then the process in the banks are, you have to ask for approval. It's not
Yeah.
like you just apply and go, and it's all good. So and when I applied for approval, they said no, you cannot. I was like, okay, let's leave. I mean, I decided to just resign, and then they got angry. They actually made sure that they destroy my career. I mean, they were like not supporting with all any documentation to me, and they tried.
Wow.
I just still hate that company,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, they are running the economy where I'm right now. One of the biggest bank here. I mean, of course, they are going down, but still, which bank I'm talking about. So I just really don't want to name them. But
Yeah.
20, I mean, I got like a remote job,
Mm.
and 20. I remember like I posted a video where my daughter is actually taking me on a cycle on Twitter, and
Yeah, I saw that.
people really like that video. But there was a backstory, right? If you remember, I just mentioned in from 2012 to 2016, she was 4, and I couldn't spend so much time with her. And then that was the day I was like, okay, now I have like my 24 hours only for her, because I'll be home. Like,
Yeah.
so that's the main part of that video. But of course, people really like just by seeing that video. And then
Yeah.
2020, I started doing consulting at the end of 2020. I paid my like 90% of my debits in 2021.
Awesome.
So because first 3 months, I mean, after I become GitHub star, I got a good gig. I just paid my personal loan within 3 months. So within 3 months,
Wow.
I was able to pay what I couldn't in past 9 years.
Wow.
I was like, okay. And then I felt relaxed. And now I just completed my entire debit. I don't have any debit anymore.
That's
Just,
amazing.
yeah. And of course, like it's more credit goes to my wife. I mean, she was like there with everything. Like, I mean, of course, we had time that I had to sell all her jewelries because, uh, yeah, I mean, there was so much debit that I couldn't afford it. So
Yeah.
we ended up selling all her jewelry. And of course, I keep buying stuff for her now because I can
Yeah.
afford it. But
Yeah.
yeah, but that's the entire story. I mean, we got separated for 10 months after I came to Germany, but that was the again a very hard time, as I mentioned. Like there was time after coming to Germany, so that was very rough period for all of us because they were
Yeah.
in India, I was here, and all thing COVID and everything going on. But I think yeah, we survived that phase as well, and now they will be going to India back with me for a summer vacation now after
Nice.
being there since 2022. So yeah, this will be the year we'll go back. But
Wow.
yeah, this is the entire story, and thanks for asking it.
Yeah. I'm so moved to hear that. And it just goes to show you that you see someone creating content on the web and you think, okay, cool, this is a great teacher, this is a great content creator, but oftentimes there's a story that is so much bigger than them, and I really appreciate you sharing that. That's absolutely incredible. I noticed, like, when you were in the slum, a kid, and going to college and doing your school, you seem to have been really motivated. This was even before you had a daughter or a wife. But this moment when your dad said, like, I can't afford your studies anymore. You said you were really heartbroken about this. Where does that come from? I mean, most kids don't want to go to school. Most kids are like, I have homework. I don't want to. But you, is it because you saw that as a way to exit the slums? Did you already see the promise of like one day I'm going to be a GDE if I study this? Or like, where did that motivation come from?
GDE thing, believe me, I had no idea about GDE till 2019. So, I mean, the motivation was because there was a guy who in the same locality who did engineering, who completed his bachelor's. So, of course, that was the time. I mean, I really screwed up in high school, right? So, my 10th marks were in 10th standard were really bad. I couldn't get admission everywhere or anywhere where I wanted to. But I ended up somehow like doing this engineering. I still call myself an accidental engineer. I had no idea like what computers are. I just went there and they said, okay, we have like in electronics and this and this and this, and they said computers. Just click. I said, okay, let's do computers.
Wait, so you got into it because some guy from your locality, was he a friend? Was he a relative? Like, so in my case, my brother taught me HTML, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. Who was this guy? Was like, did you just follow him to engineering?
He was the first engineer. Like he was doing some engineering, but I was in diploma already. I was doing the
Okay.
diploma. I mean, I started diploma without like knowing about computers. I had no idea what computers are. I had used computers during my school where they used to just give us a game on DOS.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. It was
But
like
the reason I'm asking this is because, and I'm so sorry to interrupt you. The reason I'm asking this is because I want to, like, there's listeners of this podcast. There's young people going, I'm about to finish school. I need to pick something. I don't know what to pick. I'm going to do management. I'm going to do an MBA. They have no idea. Absolutely no idea. And for me, code chose me when I was 8 years old. So I cannot relate to people who have to like make these decisions. You seem to have picked this diploma in something that you didn't know much about. Why? Where? How?
I don't know. I mean, I still don't. If you,
Okay.
as I said, like I was in a slums, so not many people were educated. Even my parents
Yeah.
are not much educated who can tell me that what needs to be done next. So I was like, okay. People told me that if you complete your 10th standard, then you go to either science or
Yeah.
you do commerce. And I was like, now what to do? Yeah,
Yeah.
I like, okay, let's go to science. But my marks were not good enough, so I couldn't get
Okay.
an admission into science. And then I went to this college for admission, and then they said, yeah, you can get an admission here, and we have this mechanical and blah 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 thing, and then computers. So I don't know. I mean, what clicked? So even when I came out, like I said, computers, and the principal said, okay, I will get you an admission in computers. When I came out, my father said, why not mechanical? It's like I have no idea about whatever he said.
Wow.
I thought like computers is cool. So I said computers, and that's it. So he
That's
was like,
awesome.
and then of course, and then I was doing diploma, and then came to know about this guy who was living in our own in the slums, and he was doing engineering because if you know, like we have this quota system in India.
Mm.
So he was from the backward category. So he was like he could afford it because there was not enough money for him. I mean,
Right.
he used to get like a lot of money back from the college. Good thing, right? I mean, of course,
Yeah.
some people who are like growing from there, they can afford it.
Yeah.
Uh, I knew his brother because we used to play together, and I never knew that he has a big brother. Believe me, that guy was like literally he closed himself for few years inside his house just to concentrate on the studies.
Wow.
When I was doing diploma, like his brother, my friend who connected me to his brother, he said, "Yeah, he's doing diploma." And then I started asking him question like, "What should I do after like completing diploma?" He said, "Like Santosh, do whatever you do, complete your bachelor's." And that clicked.
Mm.
That clicks because this is the guy who actually is doing the bachelor's in engineering, and then he said, "Do it, don't quit." So
Yeah.
that was the main motivation that okay, now I have to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to study. Of course, once I did bachelor's, I was like, no more study.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's wow. I'm so touched to hear that. And the real story of perseverance, I didn't know it was so recent, man. Like you've had this like meteoric rise, right? Like you go to any venture capitalist and what they want to hear is a hockey stick growth curve. You've had that, and on a personal level. I mean, to go from the slums to the degree and eventually out of India to Germany, incredible. That is such a great story. Thank you for sharing that. What's next?
Yes. I mean, the thing is, of course, over the years, like I have been doing so much stuff. So when I started, like in 2019, I was doing only one stuff, which is open source, and I really loved it. But I got into burnout, right? So
Yeah.
that's something which you cannot avoid. The worst thing is like you go into burnout doing the things which you love,
Yeah.
and you never know that you have reached that stage that you have
Yeah.
burnout. And same thing happened with me in 2019. So ended up in a burnout. Then 2020 again, I started doing something new. I started a podcast basically in 2020 and I ended up doing it for a year.
Uh-oh.
And burnout because I like it every week. I was doing a live stream. So I did like in a year 48 episodes, which means like 24. And then
Yeah.
I got another burnout. So now I'm trying to like see different things, try different things, not push myself a lot. I mean, I don't want to go into another burnout because then I easily lose 3 months.
Yeah.
I don't do
Well,
anything.
not only do you lose 3 months, your daughter loses 3 months of you, right? And that's not worth it. So then, are you? So, and I'm asking this. So from my side, I worked really hard last year. Also, very familiar with burnout. I Last year was the most successful year I've ever had in terms of money, but not in terms of family. In fact, I'm well known to say to friends, in 52 weeks of the year, I spent like 6 with my family, because I was working so hard. And so people ask me, how was your 2023? And, I say it was successful-ish, but depends how you define success. Because for me, success is I'm with my loved ones and I'm happy with them. And money is maybe secondary. And so for me, I feel really motivated this year to just sort of do the best I can to do the least I can in terms of work so I can have the highest quality of time with my family. And it's not being lazy, it's like working within the right boundaries. Like I do my job and nothing more, or maybe a little bit more, but family is the priority, right? That's where I'm at. I want to sort of cruise, and not drive so hard. Are you in a similar place now that you've overcome so much, or is your ambition like going hard still?
So I think whatever I'm doing is enough right now. I ended up doing
Yeah.
the same last year. I mean, I was struggling so much. I ended up doing 13 conferences. So this year
Oof.
I had to like take a step back, and because my
Good.
wife was really frustrated because I was struggling because they are new in this country, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're still new. So of course that was not something which I wanted to. So this year I'm taking it slow, just traveling to
Good.
few conferences, and
Yeah.
the family is important right now. And this year actually I want to get a PR in
Oh,
January.
nice.
So make sure like I get a PR and then because I can then stay for long term.
Yeah.
As I immigrate, you always have all this thing, and you're always scared of. So this is my third year here, and probably let's concentrate on getting that PR first, and
Awesome.
then see what is the future and what I can decide something maybe.
Awesome. Yeah. By PR, just for those listening who aren't immigrants, you mean residence permit or permanent residence.
Permanent.
I got mine, and I can tell you, until I got it, I was also, and I still don't have a German passport. I have an Indian passport. But until I got it, I was also like, oh my gosh, if I have to leave this country, I will die, because I'm heavily dependent on the healthcare. And so I fully understand where you're at. Final question, maybe. You seem like a kind, level-headed person. When you're in the slums, I have to assume it's somewhat competitive, right? Because that's the definition. It's very densely packed, full of a lot of people, and so even to go to college, you maybe have to be competitive. And you've overcome a lot. As a person who has overcome a lot, I happen to know a few people like this. I happen to be one myself. I had a phase in my life, and I know some people who have overcome a lot who have this phase where they look at people today who are maybe better off than they were when they were a certain age, who maybe don't have to work as hard, and they're embittered against these people. They're like, you young people have it so easy. How dare you? Do you have any idea how much I had to do? So that's one viewpoint. There's another viewpoint, which is, that's okay. We all spawn in a random place in random circumstances, and we make the most of it. And there's another viewpoint, which is where you're not even looking at people who are comfortable today. You're looking back at your slum and you're like, how can I help other people out of here? Or you're looking at your slum and going, oh, these people are so lazy. If I can do it, how come they don't? Right? So it's such a nuanced topic. How is it that you seem to be kind, what is the secret there? And I'm asking so that people who are maybe a little bit toxic listening to this can reflect and get better.
Of course, coming from the slums, of course, I was like very short tempered and very, but I was never competitive, like seeing other people and uh, seeing what they have achieved. I mean, if you are someone is my good friend, I will consider them as a good friend. Because one more thing is like I met, of course, few people who had this mentality that this guy comes from the slum, but I also met few people who like were so nice to me. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember like during my college days, it was uh, my second last year of my bachelor's, and I was about to like that was the year like our financial condition was totally worse. I mean, like worse than before.
Yeah.
And my father said like I won't be able to afford the fees for next year. And that
Yeah.
at that time I accepted my fate. I said it's okay. I mean, if I cannot complete my bachelor's, it's okay because I don't want to push them a lot, right? I mean, of course, that was the time I was young and crazy. I just wanted to study, but by that time I was already like 18 and above. I already like knew like how things work.
Yeah.
So one of my friend, like I remember like going from like my exams, and I said like probably I won't be able to see you all next year.
Mm.
Them and my said my
Wow.
like why? And then I told him like my father had like they don't have any money for the fee next year, so I have to like really choose. And he ended up saying, "Don't worry about it.
Mm.
We net I never needed that money, but just him saying that don't worry about it. I mean, I will pay
Yeah.
for it because he was coming from a good like family. Like they had a lot of money. It made me realize there are good people in the world. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not everyone who has money are greedy. There are people, and that guy is like still my one best friend, and he helped me a lot. I mean, during my financial crisis, I remember like taking money from him and never paying him back.
Wow.
Believe me, and whenever I paid him back, he was like, "Why you are paying me?" I was like, "Okay, I took
Yeah.
money from you like 3 years ago," and he was like, "What? So who asked you to give it back?" So he was like, of course, he had all this privilege, but he
Yeah.
was kind. I mean, I still like whenever I tell this to someone, because I get like tears in my eyes. He's ready to pay my college fee because I cannot afford it.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of people made me what I'm today. That
Awesome.
be nice, be helpful for everyone. I remember like I needed money and recently, and you helped me. So that was kind gesture, right? I mean, if I ever get the chance to pay it back, I will pay it forward, right? And that's what I try to do my best. Of course, whenever I get a chance to pay help someone, I just move forward and do it because money is not the most important part in life. I think
Yeah.
people matters more.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, whatever I am, just because of the people people I met during my entire journey.
That's awesome, man. There's a quote by somebody I really look up to and have looked up to my entire life. His name is John Foreman, and he says, "Every day you wake up, you change the world." And it seems like this person, through their actions, changed your world, and not just paid your fees. That's the surface, but made you the kind of person to pay someone else's fees, and that's the impact we can have. And what a note to end the episode. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing not just your story, but tips on how I can use Angular and really getting me excited. You know, it's called Contagious Code for multiple reasons. One of them is I see your joy in Angular, and I want you to make that joy contagious so I catch it and hopefully the listeners catch it. And you've done that. So on behalf of myself and all the listeners, Santosh, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing this with me.
Thank you, Tejas. I just had a great time just talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Santosh Yadav. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. I hope you learned a lot about Angular, Analog, and the other meta frameworks in the ecosystem. Hope you learned the stuff about NX that we talked about. If anything, if none of those, I hope you also learned and really truly marveled at the power of open source to shape one's life, like Santosh's, and change it for the better. I mean, the slums to not slum life is incredible and a testament to what we can achieve with open source. And this perfectly sets up the next few episodes in the Contagious Code podcast, where we hear from the founder of Sentry, David Kramer, and Chad Whitaker, the head of open source at Sentry. And we've deliberately structured it this way that you have the founder and then the head of open source so that it's really Sentry week. That's coming up. There's also G2I week. There's a number of really great episodes coming up, and I'm really excited for you to be a part of them. Now, if you're learning from and or enjoying this content, I'd invite you to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and like if you're consuming this on YouTube. If you're on Apple or Spotify, then if you could leave up to a 5-star review, that'd be super helpful to the algorithms that serve us. And finally, of course, sharing this on any of your social media will help the podcast be discovered. I'm so thankful for the work we're doing. I'm so thankful that you're a part of it. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in web engineering.